Good morning and welcome. Thank you for checking out my embodied breathing class. My name is Ben King. I have about a 20-year career that I've spent being fascinated with and focused on human performance. Now, I started off as a young athlete and a passionate personal trainer. And I'll say that my first half of my career was mostly under the fitness umbrella. And it wasn't until about 10 or 12 years ago that I started meditating as a way of dealing with my own anger and my attention deficit. And it really changed and is still changing my life, of course, for the better. So I've been exposed to, or I had been exposed to meditation prior to that. My mom would frequently pray to God out loud. She was always talking about the universe, and she would do this really weird thing where she would just sit there with her eyes closed, and then she would start doing this weird thing with her breath where she was breathing slow, and she was meditating. So cool. So as a young child and kind of a teenager and all of those challenges, at that chapter of life was kind of like, gosh, my mom's so weird. She would just do this thing. And it wasn't until later where I really started to see the benefit. I had a lot of anger that showed up sometimes in violence, struggled with alcoholism, drug use, and it's really changed my life, obviously, like I say, for the better. One of the best places to start, and this is probably no surprise, but one of the best places to start is just with breathing. So today, I get the privilege of taking us through some diaphragmatic breathing basics. So let's start with a little bit of a practice. Before we get into understanding a little bit more about diaphragmatic breathing, I want to invite you just to take a moment. And if you're sitting in your chair or standing up, take a moment just to feel what's beneath you. Notice your natural breathing patterns. As soon as you start to focus on your breathing, you might notice things start to shift. If it happens, no worries. But don't try to change your breathing as we start this practice. Just notice. Really beneficial to just practice being aware. Sometimes we notice that our breathing might feel like it's higher up in the chest. No need to change that if that's the case for you. Sometimes we might breathe in and we might notice that our breathing is really fast, even though we're not really exerting a lot of energy. We might be sitting at our desk responding to emails, an email comes in. So right now, just continue to notice where your breathing is in your body. Notice how long it naturally takes you to breathe in. Notice the sensations in your stomach. So continue breathing normally. And as you're breathing normally, what sensations can you become present to? It's a good opportunity to scan the body and just take an opportunity to breathe here. And then see if you can feel that anywhere in the body. See if you can even feel it in your feet or your legs. Continuing just to breathe normally. We'll start to introduce a different way of breathing in a little bit, but right now just breathing normally and noticing what shows up. Do you notice tension somewhere? Take your attention there and without changing it, just like we introduced a normal breathing pattern without changing it. Just see what happens when you start to focus your attention on it. Does the tension go away? Notice what's happening naturally or what's happening out of choice. Bring your attention and awareness to some of the muscles in the face, maybe across the forehead or across the eyes. Notice what's happening in your cheeks or around the mouth. Breathing normally. Notice what's happening for you in the neck, the upper back, or your arms. And when you're ready, start to wiggle your fingers and your toes. Maybe roll the shoulders around a little bit. We might make a sour face. And then a big open smile. Might feel weird, but let's just give yourself an opportunity to do that. So welcome back. Thanks for meditating. That was an opportunity of just recognizing what normal breathing is like for you. I think it's a really great way to lead into just having more awareness for what happens, right, in your day-to-day. The whole purpose of practicing mindfulness or practicing a diaphragmatic breathing pattern, well, the benefits or the list of benefits is quite long. So it might be different for you, but really one of the big benefits of breathing or paying attention to your breathing in certain ways is that it can shift your experience. Nobody wants to have bad days. Nobody wants to have bad experiences when you're working away at your computer or you're interacting with somebody, whether it's an intimate family member, your partner, spouse, or siblings, or friends, right? Maybe it's somebody at work that challenges you, right? To be aware of your breathing can shift your experience from having a negative one to being aware. And over time, the more you practice, you can allow yourself to actually have more choice, more freedom, and more control. Right? Who doesn't want more of that? So I think a cool place to go as we start to embark down this, we've done this normal breathing practice, and now I want to kind of introduce, as we're kind of talking about this in a beginner's mindset, some of the speed bumps that people might experience when they start off on a meditative journey, right? Kind of like I did 10 to 12 years ago when I started meditating. I did a lot of these things. We might call them common mistakes, but I kind of like speed bumps because it suggests that we're continuing to move forward down the path, right? We might hit a little hiccup or a pothole, we can call them. But one of the big ones, I think, is that people might start off with a meditative practice with a little too much ambition, if that makes sense. They might try to set out and do a practice that's too long. And there's a lot of consequences to practicing longer than you've been practicing. Over time, you can start to add more on. But there's a lot of things that happen when you set out to do meditation for too long at the beginning stages. One of the issues with doing that is that it becomes boring, right? For some people, they're not used to the practice, and so they stop practicing because they just assume that meditation is supposed to be long, and it doesn't become this rewarding, fulfilling thing that addresses the issues that you want to address, the issues that you care about. And so that's a big thing. We'll talk about some other ones, but the expectation for immediate results, right? We live in a world where we're so easily provided for. You want something, what do now? You go on to Amazon, you type it in, boom, immediate gratification, right? And so a lot of times when people start meditating, they show up and they want those immediate results, right? Or you do it for a couple days and you think it's not working, I give up, right? And so I would suggest treating a meditative or mindfulness practice sort of like you would if you were starting off a running regimen, right? That you wanted to go out and go running. If you haven't run for many years or never ran in your life, you want to start small, right? Maybe go out and see what it's like to run from this spot to that corner, right? And if you can do that and you feel good, you might choose to go a little bit further. But if you haven't run before, you might not sign up for a marathon, right? I've heard of people signing up for a half marathon, never running before in their life, and they do it, which is cool. If you're prolonging the life of your joints and tissues, sometimes when we do things like that, it can be too much and takes away from that lens. But yeah, so it's good to expect results quickly, but we want to start off with small. And what I mean by that, to quantify that, if we're starting off with, a 2 to 3 minute practice once a day, kudos, cheerio, right? Good on you. That's wonderful. In fact, some of the research suggests that if you can practice for just 2 to 3 minutes a day, it's better than one practice, or let me rephrase that. If you can practice for 2 to 3 minutes a day, 7 days a week, would be far greater than 35 minutes once a week. So while the timing might shake out to be similar, the benefit to doing a small daily practice, ideally in the morning, but can be done at any time of day, would yield far greater results, right? Because it shifts your mindset. You start to see the world differently. Love Wayne Dyer's quote, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." I think that's one of the coolest quotes. And meditating daily helps shift your perspective, how you're seeing the world, how the world is being presented to you. Another expectation people have, which we would categorize under speed bumps, would be that we often have this image of Buddhist monks or yogis that have a lot of practice, and we think we're supposed to, air quotes, clear the mind. It's impossible, right? As soon as you start thinking about clearing the mind, you start thinking about all the things that are in the mind. For example, if I tell you not to think about a pink elephant, what's the first thing that popped into your mind? Likely it was a pink elephant. So using the breath is a great way to get aside from that expectation that we're supposed to be able to empty the mind. It's impossible. What we want to do is train the mind what to think about. And the breath, like Dorothy's red slippers in The Wizard of Oz, they're always there, right? They were with her the whole time, right? I never got that analogy until I read Jamie Shapiro's book, Brilliant, which you can find on Amazon. It's amazing. Check it out. She used that analogy and I thought it was great. Dorothy had these red slippers all along. Like our breath, it's there all the time, right? Sometimes it's short and shallow, sometimes it's speedy, sometimes it's there in a way that our neck is tight and our breathing is high up in the chest. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But we're going to talk about just 2 or 3 more speed bumps, and then we're going to go into our next practice of really starting to feel diaphragmatic breathing. So another quick little speed bump is that when we practice for too long, one of the things that can happen is we start to practice self-abuse. We start to criticize ourselves. We get in our mind where you've been meditating for a period that's maybe a little bit long for what's comfortable for you. Remember, this is supposed to be good. This is supposed to be fulfilling and enriching your life. So if you start to find yourself going into the inner critic where it's like, I'm not good at this, this is stupid, What am I doing? This is uncomfortable. My back is starting to hurt. Okay, so call it good for that day and or that practice, and come back, wiggle around, come back later, right? Or give yourself a little bit of a break. Like when you're in the gym and you're lifting weights, once in a while, I hope you set those weights down during your workout, right? If you're out for a jog and you're new to jogging, I hope you're taking breaks. Same with a meditative practice, right? And I mentioned discomfort. A lot of people think they have to be in this position where they're sitting on the ground, sitting on their meditation cushion with their legs crossed, their hands open, and what does this even mean, right? Well, there's benefit, but only if you have the logic, or only if you have been exposed to the reasons that works and that resonates with you. But in the beginning, it's really important to find yourself in a really comfortable place, right? For me, I do a lot of meditating right here at my desk, in my chair. Sometimes I just got to push my chair back, take a breath, and chill. Sometimes that's all it takes for me. Sometimes I do it longer. So, position, find what's comfortable for you, right? Last speed bump I'll talk about is disbelief. How could something so simple have such profound benefit for you? Right? All of a sudden, we shift into this mindset of it's a waste of time, right? It's too simple. All I have to do is pause and slow down. How could it be that simple? Well, I promise you, I believe in it. It is truly that simple, right? So let's go into a diaphragmatic practice. If you're sitting in a chair, I want you to lean back into the chair. If you would like to do this practice lying on your back, I would strongly suggest being on your back. Now, I'm going to be here in my chair while I coach through this one, but if you're on your back, I can coach you through a little bit different experience. So chair or back, up to you. And I'm going to actually recline my chair a little bit, and I'm going to coach as if I were laying on my back on the ground. Okay, if you want to put a pillow underneath your head, and also a really comfortable position would be to put a pillow underneath your legs, right underneath the knee, so you have a nice natural bend of the knee. Your back will be supported. I want you to be able to feel the floor, or if you're in your chair, allow yourself to lay back. And if you're in a chair or on the sofa, give your head a little support so your neck is at ease, right? If you don't have a sofa or a chair high enough to support your head, then go ahead and find your way to the floor. I'm going to be a little bit of a hypocrite here because I want to stay next to my computer here, and I won't have a support on my head, but I want you to try to find a comfortable position. Take one hand, place it on your stomach. Okay, place one hand on your stomach. And I want you to take the other hand. I want you to place it right on your chest. Take a few normal breaths. Sometimes I might refer to this as natural. Take a few natural breaths here. Just like we started with in the beginning. Notice what's moving more, your chest or your hand. Take a few breaths. And if you are able, try to keep the chest relatively soft and still. So when you breathe in, see if you can let your stomach expand. Also want to encourage you to try and keep your abdominal muscles relaxed. You want to be careful from pushing out and using too much abdominal muscle. You don't want to push the stomach out, but you want to breathe in and feel an expanding in the stomach. So breathing in nice and deep, trying to breathe as if you're breathing into the belly. Sort of pretending that as you breathe in, the airway is open and it can pass by the chest and sort of inflate down in the belly. If you're able, breathing in through the nose helps to slow down the amount of time it takes to inhale. And if you breathe out in a way that would be similar to fogging up a mirror, right? The mouth doesn't have to be open super wide, but think about the same thing in the back of the mouth. So as you breathe out, you kind of make a very light ha sound. Continue to breathe into the belly, looking for that expansion as you inhale, and then exhale. Take just 2 or 3 final breaths, and then we'll come back. Shoulders and neck relaxed, chest nice and soft. One more breath in. And then breathe out, letting that air leave the belly. So that's an introduction to diaphragmatic breathing, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what was happening there. First, I think it's important to recognize a little bit of the anatomy, and then we can talk a little bit about the physiology. I kind of geek out on some of that science. And so when we say breathe into the belly, I think it's worth noting that it's physiologically, anatomically impossible to breathe into the belly. We can only breathe into the lungs, right? The lungs live in the chest, right? But we say breathe into the belly, even though it's anatomically and physiologically impossible. We say that because of what happens with the diaphragm and how that activates. There are different ways of breathing, obviously, right? I can breathe in through my nose, I can breathe in through my mouth. I can breathe in using an activation of the muscles in my neck and chest as a way of like lifting the chest. Some of you, when we started to breathe in, you may have took a breath in and started to notice that your chest was rising and the stomach was going inward. So you might have taken a breath and gone like that, where the stomach went in and the chest lifted up. Well, if you put your fingers on those muscles around the neck, you might notice that as you breathe in that way, those muscles get tight. Over the practice that we just did, you may have increased your ability to soften those muscles and soften through the chest. And then as you took a breath in, you were able to expand down here in the belly. And then as you exhale, that returned back to normal. Why does that happen? We're not really breathing into the belly, although the imagery of holding a balloon or a reservoir to catch the air down in the belly can be quite useful. But what's actually happening is we're promoting an activation in the muscle called the diaphragm, hence diaphragmatic breathing, right? So as we breathe in to the belly, as we say, what's happening is the diaphragm, which is shaped sort of like a parachute, right? It's shaped sort of like a parachute right at the bottom of my lungs. Okay, and as I breathe in, when that diaphragm activates, it moves from this parachute type shape down and it flattens out. So the muscle is connected to, it's attached to the bottom of the lungs. So when it pulls down on the bottom of the lungs, the air inflates the bottom. And what happens when that muscle, the diaphragm, contracts, it pushes down on these organs in the stomach. And what happens is those organs in the stomach then push out just a little bit, right? So that's what's happening when we breathe in that way. When we breathe in that way, there are a whole lot of benefits that show up, right? One of the things that can happen as we start to do this, we can really calm our body by changing our hormonal state, right? If you find yourself in a stressed state of being, this stimulates what is referred to as the parasympathetic nervous system. When we're stressed, we get that email, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, or one of those family members that we all have says something that might trigger you, or a coworker, right? When you notice that there's that stimulation, right? That means you're in the fight or flight nervous system. That means that the part of the brain called the amygdala, which lives almost perfectly in the center of your head, shaped like two almonds, it's responsible for keeping us safe, detecting threat and danger, right? It does not know the difference between a good and a bad threat, right? Or fear. It doesn't know the difference between a good challenge and a bad one, right? For example, there's tons of good situations where if we breathe, if we breathe into our belly and we can turn that off, there's places where there's places in life where we want to listen to that amygdala. But if we can breathe into the belly, we can make different choices, right? We can calm our hormonal state by turning the amygdala off and starting to assess and navigate the situation more appropriately. Because the amygdala's job is to keep us safe. And it's great for avoiding real danger, but it's bad for learning. And it's bad for improving or changing our behavior, right? It's not ideal to let the amygdala be active when we're trying to courageously live boldly, right? So we want to learn how we can deactivate that amygdala or turn off our fight or flight nervous system and activate that. It's a great way, breathing down here in the belly, it's a great way to combat negative feelings or negative thoughts. It's also incredibly beneficial for lowering your blood pressure and lowering your resting heart rate, right? I know that right now we're living in the world of the coronavirus, right? It's everywhere. Also now we have protests and riots and looting, and the world is different right now. The world is presenting a lot of challenge for so many people, right? So blood pressure is high, resting heart rates are high. The feeling of threat is also elevated. So a lot of benefits to taking the time and just noticing where is the breathing so that you can build your skills of being more in choice, being more in control, right? I used to think that we all had more control over our internal lives than we do our external lives. And I think that that's true, although I now see it as a skill worth developing, right? When I was a little younger and quite arrogant, I thought that we should be able to, not recognizing that even in my own life, I didn't have the skill that I was telling everybody, oh, you've got to be able to recognize what's going on inside your body. But I still had my own anger and behavioral issues that needed addressing. So I think now it's important to recognize that it's a skill. It's a skill worth developing, right? To be able to recognize what's going on inside of our body, the skill to be able to recognize that we're having an elevated response to something, and be able to go into our body, into our stomach, breathe in a way that sort of regulates, right? Calms the storm for a little bit. One of the things that I get from people a lot is, I want to be able to focus more. Guess what? This is the recipe. Being able to breathe diaphragmatically, being able to practice regular diaphragmatic breathing, this is the tool, this is the recipe that we need in order to help train our brain in its ability to focus on what we want to focus on, right? Because that amygdala, right? That's part of our lizard brain. It doesn't know the difference between a car coming at you or a scary presentation that you might be working on, right? It just says avoid both, right? That's the lizard brain, right? Or we call it the reptilian brain. Procrastination in a big way, that's all about the lizard brain, right? So when we talk about this ability to be able to focus, we want to train the lizard brain to take a back seat, right? It's very common for that lizard brain to be at the wheel. And I'm taking some stuff here from Trevor Reagan, who I really appreciate his work. He's done some TED Talks. I love his TED Talk on fear, and I can't remember the name of it, but if you do a little Google search here, I want to give credit to Trevor Reagan. He does a really great YouTube video or a TED Talk video. I think it's only like 12 or 15 minutes if I'm remembering right, but kind of paraphrasing some of the things he talked about in that. So we want to be able to breathe into our stomach. If we can breathe into our stomach, we can acknowledge the lizard brain, which is fear, right? And get rid of it. Or I'm sorry, not get rid of it, but be able to acknowledge it and then choose to do the exact opposite of what it's telling you to do. Okay? So check that out. It's pretty incredible. Let's do another practice, and then we will sort of debrief that and conclude. So to practice next, I want you to imagine a box. So now to get further into this style of breathing, I want you to acknowledge that the respiratory pattern has 4 parts. 4 parts in this, we can call it respiratory pattern or diaphragmatic rhythm, respiratory rhythm. I've heard it called a lot of different things. It has 4 parts. We're going to call part 1, although you could start anywhere. But one part is the inhalation. The second part would be the space that exists in between the inhalation and the exhalation. Sometimes it doesn't exist. Sometimes it's just inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. So obviously then, if part 1 was inhalation and part 2 was the space in between, part 3 would become the exhalation. Obviously now you know where I'm going. Part 4 is the space that lives in between the exhalation and the inhalation. So a common breathing practice we refer to as box breathing, right? So if you're doing box breathing, you might picture in your mind, or I'm just going to use this little space right here on the screen, you might picture a square box, right? And let's say that your inhalation takes 3 seconds to inhale, you might imagine a line being drawn upward. And then if we're making a nice even square, you might think 3 seconds of a pause in between the inhale and the exhale. Tracking? So you might take 3 seconds of a pause here, and then if it's a square, of course, now 3 seconds to exhale. And then, of course, 3 seconds to pause. In these two pauses, we might say at the top and the bottom, it's important to keep the airway relaxed. How do we do that? Well, first, I think we can practice closing it off, because that's probably the easiest for most people. So when you breathe in, let's breathe in through your nose. I'm a little congested. I did some yard work yesterday, so I noticed that my allergies have a little response. I might sound a little nasally, a little congested, but that's okay, right? Just life. So when we breathe in, okay, we're going to breathe in through the nose. Breathe in and hold. Now I want you to So let's pause. That is not the way I want to teach you to breathe. I did that as a way of creating some awareness. I did that as a way of creating some awareness so that you could tell what it's like and hopefully catch yourself and be able to not do that if you're able. And so when we breathe in, if you're able, we want to try to keep that airway open, right? So if we breathe in that way, if we breathe in the way where we use these muscles in the neck to clinch down, what happens is the diaphragm's trying to return to its normal parachute shape. It's parachute when it's at rest, right? So what happens is it's trying to return to its normal state, but you've got these muscles that are closing the airway. What you might feel is pressure in the thoracic cavity. You might feel that pressure. So let's all do that. Hold your breath, but try to breathe out. So close those muscles. You feel the pressure. You feel how you're pressurizing that cavity. Now breathe in. Breathe in. And in. In. Out. In. 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 Out. Watch my hand here. In. Out. Good. So I hope that you're starting to notice the difference between trapping the air and just being in a pause. Being in a respiratory pause keeps that nervous system relaxed. When you trap the air, it can be sort of like drowning, if you think about it, right? Because you can't breathe in, right? You can breathe out when you're underwater, but you can't, and so that stimulates the nervous system. That triggers the amygdala when you're trying to breathe in but can't, right? Or trying to breathe out but can't. Imagine if you were covering your own mouth and trying to breathe out, but you weren't able. That activates the amygdala. That triggers that sympathetic, also called fight or flight nervous system. So if we're breathing diaphragmatically, our goal is to breathe down here in the belly. We want to really try our best to stay relaxed, and we can promote more relaxation and get a better benefit for doing the practice if we're able to really take your time. And you can do this little gesturing with your hands. I think it's quite helpful. It's a practice that I've used for a while, and eyes can be open or closed while you're doing this. Maybe it's just feeling around with it. But the last thing I'll say as we start to close, so I kind of introduced it in the box form, right? Inhale, pause, exhale, and then pause. You could choose any number of seconds, right? I would say the longer the better, right? And we can get into some science later on. If you have questions, I really want to ask you to email me or reach out to us. If you're watching this on YouTube, post some questions in the comments below. I'll respond to those. But we can, there is some really cool science into, manipulating these numbers to be different. We're just starting off with a square because keeping it even is simple. But one of the things that I would suggest, I use the box for teaching purposes, but over time, start to round the edges, round the corners. So it's not such an abrupt inhale, stop, pause, abruptly begin and stop the exhale, pause. I would say, see if you can sort of round the edges. So you might start to think about a circle that has 4 parts, right? A circle that has 4 parts, where the 4 parts sort of blend together nicely. So as you begin the inhalation, you sort of inhale softly 3 seconds, and then blend in to the pause, and then blend into the exhale. As you start to complete the exhale, you sort of blend in. So you might even do this gesture with your hands as you're doing that, so that you can sort of really feel, all right, I'm pausing between my inhalation and my exhalation. My airway is open, but as you begin that exhalation, it's more of a circular or a square with round edges. Yeah. So I am available for one-on-one coaching. If you're watching this and you have more questions, you want to practice a little bit deeper, you have some specific things you want to address, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is available on our website, f7lifestyles.com. You can email us, but I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a very blessed day, a peaceful day, and enjoy your practice.